The content which irritates me the most, anything that's around hacks and secrets, ask this question during the interview to guarantee you get the job. The one thing I know in recruiting is there is no guarantees.
You're right, like I see a lot of that content is like, well, I got my job doing this. Mate, that job was 6 years ago or 10 years ago and you worked there for a year. The job market has changed. Like anyone who's been looking for a job for the last year will tell you that any method that you used prior to 2023 is not relevant to this market. You have to throw out your rulebook and start again and approach this search with much more rigor than you ever had to before. How would you recommend people evaluate the content that they're seeing to ensure that they're listening to the right voices that's relevant for their circumstance?
Number one, this one is maybe underplayed a little bit. The second thing is you have to go look them up on LinkedIn. And the things that I'm looking at is...
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of the Open to Work podcast. It's been such an incredible journey since James and I launched this over 3 months ago, almost 4 months now. And just to see the impact that we've been able to have in helping people navigate their job search has been truly incredible. We started this with a mission of wanting to kind of cut through the noise and support people in navigating this really tricky job market. And it feels like, we've been able to do that to a certain extent. And we're really proud of how far we've come so far, over 50,000 listens so far, almost 10,000 subscribers. So, thank you for supporting us in getting this far. Obviously James isn't here anymore, which is gutting, but the real mission of this podcast still remains. And while we can continue to help people, we certainly will. And so it's without any further ado that I'm able to introduce a absolute legend in the recruiting space. Joel Lalgee, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you, Matt. Great to be here. I'm sad that James isn't here as well, but I feel like
James
you're doing an amazing job.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, exactly. James asked me to be on the podcast. Joel, you want to jump on the podcast? Sure. Are you going to be there? No.
Yeah, exactly. He's done the easy bit, and now he's not going to be here to actually do any of the recording.
It's because we met in Vegas, and ever since then,
if you sign up to anything in Vegas, you probably had no idea what you're doing.
Exactly. Well, great to be here, though. Huge fan of the podcast. Love what you guys are doing, or what you're doing now, and I feel like you're gonna do amazing. So great to be here.
Thank you. And I will start this with in the way that we start all of our guest interviews, which is putting them on the spot straight away, as if they were a candidate and we're in an interview, and asking you the question that still always gets asked. So, Joel, tell us about yourself. Give us a brief introduction.
Yeah, my name's Joel Lalgee. I've been in the recruitment space for coming up to a decade, so it'll be a decade next year. And I would say I've worked mainly for agencies, so helping companies hire talent, but not as an internal recruiter, as like an external resources. And I've recruited in a variety of industries, everything from manufacturing to tech. And I am just passionate now about really getting the word out, just like you guys are, or just like you are with this podcast, really helping out job seekers to be able to weed out what's good information, what's bad information. And recently I've become really passionate too about just talking about like corporate culture and maybe some of the things that change. So I'm a content creator, a recruiter, fellow podcaster as well, and excited to be here.
Yeah, and you've got in the background, for those who are watching visually, your kind of neon sign. Your setup's looks a little bit more established and more like American podcast than like
Yes, yeah.
But that's the brand, that the Realist Recruiter. Maybe tell us a bit about how you launched that and your kind of journey to become a content creator, for those who don't already know you.
Yeah, so I've been creating content for about 5 years now, which is unbelievable. When I look at it, I think when you start creating content, at least when I started creating content, I didn't really have a mission. I didn't really have a goal. I started because I was a little bit bored in my recruitment role, and I wanted a way to be able to reach people and put out good information, really for generating clients for the recruiting business that I was a part of. Didn't like cold calling, didn't like cold emailing, and thought, you know what, this content could be a good way to reach people. And so that's where it started out. But then I suddenly realized, I really love writing. And a lot of my content for the first 3 years was just purely written content. I was like, I really enjoy writing. I like coming up with something creative, writing, and then seeing the impact that you could have on people kind of blew my mind. Like, you could write one post and impact potentially thousands of people. And then about 2 years ago, it's coming up to 2 years. I My sister actually went viral on TikTok, and I had been on TikTok for a long time, but I'd given it up to really focus on LinkedIn.
Mm.
And my sister sends me a text. She's like, "Yeah, I'm going viral on TikTok." I'm like, "What?" And then I started looking at TikTok again, and I'm like, the time that I'd stopped on TikTok to focus on LinkedIn, at that time it was very much the stereotypical TikTok content, a lot of dancing kids, and lots of like Instagram influencers coming over. But I'm scrolling the feed again. I notice there's a lot of career people and like job search advice. And even better, a lot of the advice that's out there is really bad. And so that's why I came up with the name, The Realist Recruiter, because I just thought I want to give like real advice. And I also want to be able to just show that I'm a real person. Like I'm a normal
Mm.
person. I'm not some weird robot that's like making these decisions that's going to impact people's lives. This like way that this kind of picture of recruiters is painted. I'm a normal guy. I've got kids, and more so than that, I can create content that's just authentic, and we can talk about things. Talk about culture.
Mm.
We can talk about interview process. We can talk about these things. So, not saying we have all the right answers, but we're definitely going to give you more of a balanced point of view. We're not
Mm.
talking about hacks and secrets and best questions to ask in interviews or anything like that. We're just talking about like what are some of the real issues that people are facing. And so I did that. And then my wife was like, on every podcast I see, they've always got like neon lights. And I was like, oh,
I was going to say, you've
that's
got
good.
a great neon setup. You've got pinks going on. You've got the whole, yeah. I mean, you must had some sort of epic man cave. This is not in the main room of your house, surely.
No, this is a little home office situation that I've got. And it's been an evolution. Definitely didn't start out like this.
Yeah, for sure. And when you think about like the content that you were trying to cut, we talk about cutting through the noise
Yeah.
as a podcast, because there is a lot of BS kind of content out there. What do you think when you started with that vision? What do you think were like kind of some of the main themes that people were talking about that you were trying to cut through, and how do you think that's changed over the last couple of years to where we are now?
Yeah, I think the content which irritates me the most is anything that's around like hacks and secrets and like copy pasted DMs, or even content that's like, hey, just follow up with a recruiter. Like this is how you follow up with a recruiter, and here's the DM, here's a template that you should send. I think that's the content that's the most irritating. And then as we start to get into it, there's a lot of content around process, and obviously like as most recruiters are going to know, like the content out around the ATS is just really, really frustrating. And I think then you start to get into topics like networking and how to network. And I think there's just so much positioning with job search content that like there's just this quick, easy one-way fix for the problem, which is getting a job. And I think on the flip side, as a recruiter, you just see like there are a lot of different avenues to get the job, and there's best practices for sure, but there's also things that happen it's almost like an anomaly. Something will happen and someone will land a job in this crazy way, and then you go, oh, like I would never advise anyone to do that, but it worked for this person. But the problem is you get a lot of individuals that will have an experience, and then they try and make that the playbook for everybody else, and it just doesn't take into account all of the nuances that go into recruitment and hiring, which you just don't know unless you've been involved in recruitment and hiring. And so I think that was the heart behind it. It was like, hey, I'm going to talk about best practices. I'm going to try and debunk stuff. But I'm also going to approach it with like that mentality of I don't have all of the answers. And really anyone who claims to have all the answers doesn't know much, because that's the one thing in recruitment and hiring, right? It's like,
it depends. Yeah, I mean, that's
everything
the
depends.
kind of old
Exactly.
joke that James and I used to come back to, right? Is that every single answer, every single question we get is the answer. It depends on your individual circumstance. Like what, you're right. Like I see a lot of that content is like, well, I got my job doing this.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of people who dine out on this. I got my job at Microsoft by following these steps. And it's like, mate, that job was 6 years ago or, 10 years ago, and you worked there for a year. and you're still dining out that you worked at Microsoft and this is how you got that job. But like the job market has changed. Like anyone who's been looking for a job in the last year will tell you that any method that you used prior to 2023 is not relevant to this market, and you have to throw out your rulebook and start again and approach this search with much more rigor than you ever had to before. You can't just haphazard like start pinging people or like use a bot to write your CV and stuff like that. Like if you're going to do that, you're going to end up down that path lies madness. There are absolutely no hacks. It's structure and process and resilience at the end of the day. How would you recommend people kind of evaluate the content that they're seeing to ensure that they are hearing the right, listening to the right voices that's relevant for their circumstance? We are delighted to be sponsored by Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations like interviews, intakes, and debriefs, and then provides a perfectly summarized note of everything that was discussed. That means that you can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. I've spoken to so many recruiters and recruiting leaders who are loving using Metaview across their organizations. It's saving them time, but it also means that they have more data to make better decisions. So for every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can now make confident and informed decisions, and recruiters can finally take control of the interview process. The impact on candidate experience is also massive. Since recruiters don't have to worry about taking notes in the moment, they can really focus on being present and engaged with you. Forward-thinking recruiters at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora are all leveling up their interviews with Metaview. So head on over to metaview.ai/open to work to get started for free on your first 5 calls.
I think number one, and this one is maybe underplayed a little bit, but I think you've got to like what the person's saying to a certain extent. Okay, so and I know that sounds kind of you'll be a little bit contradictory to this next point, but I actually think like if you like the person, that is a big deal, right? Because if you just hate the person and what their message is, not a good start. But then the second thing is you have to go look them up on LinkedIn, and the things that I'm looking at is number one, how long have they been in the workforce for as a whole? So like, are you listening to somebody with 20 years experience? Are you listening to somebody with 2 years experience? Are you listening to someone with 6 months experience? And then just looking at like, what have they done? What I'm looking for is people who have been extensively involved in HR or talent acquisition, which is recruitment, or somebody that's demonstrated, a high level of like executive presence in maybe another field. So for example, if somebody's talking a lot about sales hiring and how to get a job in sales, look, if they've been a VP of sales for 20 years, they've got some credibility because they've built sales teams, they've hired people, they know what it takes to be successful. The red flags that I'm looking for are people who have owned that business for a really, really long time, because the fact is they haven't probably been on the job search even, so I don't know where they would even talk about it. But then also like a lot of people who own their own businesses, that's just them, and so not even doing hiring for their own business. And on the flip side, you see a lot of people who, are talking a big game, and then you just look through their background and there's one person in my mind where they've got a huge following, and then you go look at their background and they were in like the media or something for like 5 years prior. And I'm like, okay, you have millions of followers, which is, can be a sign of credibility, but zero experience in actual, like business as a whole. Right. And so like, I've had people go to my profile and they're like, well, you maybe you don't fit some of that criteria. And this is where I also go, well, look, you have to then, determine like, do I like this person? Are they trustworthy? And do they have that credibility? And then look at how they're responding to comments and look at what the comments are, because there are some people who, will be out there and they're getting roasted in their own comments and they're not responding to any of it. And again, if you go to someone's post and you got 50 recruiters saying this is bad information, pay attention to that.
Every now and again, someone writes something that's like just completely untrue about the ATS, for example. It's a really, really common one that people will write misinformation about out there. And I'll just come in and say, like, I'm so sorry. Like, I've worked in recruiting for like over 10 years. I've worked on most of the ATSs that are being used across corporate America. And this is false. Like, and here's why.
Exactly.
And I will probably be one of many people, but you look at some of those posts. I think there was a moment I remember talking with James as we were like deciding what to do with the podcast. And I remember coming straight off the back of looking at a TikTok video of someone who'd never worked in recruitment, who was talking about how to beat the ATS and here's how you gain the skills, sections and whatever. I was like, this is why we have to keep doing this. Because this person has literally never used an applicant tracking system in their life. And they've got a million hits on TikTok with this video, which was tantamount to abject lying. And they're selling their like coaching services off the back of it. And people may be buying and converting into a paid customer for someone who has no idea what they're doing. And that is a real shame. And it is absolutely, to your earlier comment, like preying on the weak. It's preying on a situation right now, which is where lots of people are very vulnerable. And we need to support people in navigating that and evaluating the content that they see. And especially when it comes to recruitment, just because someone is a good content creator doesn't mean that they are knowledgeable about what they're doing. Those two things are independent. They can sometimes overlap, but they are completely independent skills and should not be seen as the same. And we have to be really careful with who we look at.
Anybody that's talking about quick hacks, so a couple of those hacks would be resume hacks, anything like, hey, just copy the skills from a job description and, put it in white ink on your resume.
Oh yeah, I've seen rise of white inking again. Like that is over a decade old, folks. Like that is not new. That has been going on for absolutely ages. Since computers essentially were invented, they've had white inking as a thing in CVs. It doesn't work. Companies are wise to it, and they've been wise to it for 20 years.
I know. So like but anything that's like that. The other one I see a lot of is, and I see this on Instagram because it'll be like, music, and it'll be like how I landed a $150,000 a year job in caption, and then you go to the caption and it's like the perfect DM to send to a hiring manager or
I think anyone who drops like a salary in a job post, I'm immediately like mega skeptical. Anyone who talks about like money or how much money they earn like publicly or say that you can land a $150,000 job with this, it's just like I'm immediately calling BS. Like, how do you know? Like, and how it's probably not relevant to you. Like, just because it's got that salary could completely depend. So many things depend on that. And there's the fact that you could have a hack that would help someone get that job is completely bogus. Like,
yeah. Or like anyone who says like, this is another one too, where it's like, ask this question during the interview to guarantee you get the job. It's like, the one thing I know in recruiting is there is no guarantees, in anything. Yeah. I've seen people accept jobs and then accept a counteroffer a day later. I've seen people accept jobs and not show up for the first day. I've seen companies make an offer and then 2 weeks later decide that, that they go in a different direction. Like, no, there's no guarantees in any of this. So any of that content really gets me. And then I just again, gimmicks and hacks and like shortcuts are the ways, the things that I'm looking for. And then just going back, like, what's your actual background here? What have you actually done? Another telltale sign. So
if you've accepted an offer in this job market, would you keep looking? Would you recommend candidates keep looking right up until the day that you start? Like, because a friend of mine, it comes, recruiter to recruiter, right? Let's play out a scenario. A friend of mine been offered a job. He works in the recruiting industry. I'm not going to call them out, obviously, or anything. Call them out or anything like that. But they've accepted. They've been offered a job, but they're still in a number of other interview processes. And they were asking like, should I accept this job? Like, should I keep looking? Should I turn down these other ones? And my advice was just like, if it was the other way around, and I used to be, once I've accepted a job offer, full integrity, fully committed, I'm yours, and like I think that's like that was morally where I stood for my entire career. Yeah. But I think in the last year, if I've seen anything, is like companies will turn on like you on an absolute dime, and in order to de-risk yourself, you should definitely continue to interview right up until the final days until your start date, because they could pull that offer and not have any questions about it themselves and not feel any remorse about, like, maybe feel a bit of remorse, for the hiring manager, but like they're not going to, the company will immediately tell on you. I mean, what would you, in that scenario, what do you think? And because I imagine lots of people out there are going through similar things. right
Yeah.
now. I mean, what do you recommend to folks who've got a job offer but they've still got interviews on the table?
Yeah, look, I mean, for me, I'm always about just transparency as much as possible within reason. So if I'm working with a company through interviews, I'm gonna let them know like, hey, you're not the only company I'm interviewing with. I'm not gonna get into specifics and tell them what companies or tell them anything. I think a generally good technique, right? If you're interviewing with a company, let them know like, hey, other people, I'm interviewing other places as well. You're like, you're not
Sometimes it's
my
not bad
only.
to say that regardless of what your situation is, you know?
Exactly. Like even if you're just applying for other jobs, hey, I'm in process with other places.
Yeah.
Oh, what? Really? What? I don't need to get specific. So, but then when it comes to the offer, just saying something like, "Look, this is a great offer, but I have other companies I'm working with, and I want to play out those situations. I want to run through the process so I can evaluate things fairly, just like you've done with other candidates." And then two things are either going to happen. They're either going to be like, okay, cool. It will give you, 10 days, right? Or they'll put a deadline on it. The second thing they'll really put the pressure on and they'll say, look, and they'll make it really short deadline, say, look, we need an answer or we're going to pull it. And I think if they do that second one where they are really, turning the screws and really putting the pressure on, that's where I feel less remorse in accepting something and continuing through other processes because you gave them the chance and you were honest with them and said, hey, look, I'm interviewing other places. And if they really start to pull on that recruiter juice and they try and close you, that's on them. And I've done that before as a recruiter because I've had pressure. I was an agency recruiter, so I had pressure from my the sales and all this sort of stuff to close a candidate. And I've closed people before and then they've come up to me and said, actually, I got a better offer 2 weeks later, and I've gone back to the client and said, look, you were the one who wanted me to really put the pressure on here. You kind of get what you deserve, right? Force someone to make an answer and don't allow them to evaluate everything, especially when you're the one or when companies, they're interviewing 5 people and they have no problem telling candidates, hey, yeah, final interview, we'll be back in touch soon. And then 3 weeks later, because a hiring manager interviews or whatever, scheduling conflicts, it's like they will let you cook for 3 weeks without any hesitation. So I think be as transparent as you can, but at the end of the day, like you said, this is business, man. It's like you cannot have your cake and eat it too, right? You can't be like, yeah, no, this is we really care about people and blah 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 blah, but you need to accept this offer in a day.
Yeah. But it's an exploding offer, and yeah.
And then the only other thing is, I think you just have to be mindful that in these industries, it's small. It's a small world.
Yes. That was
so
yeah.
You just got to understand you're dealing with people through it. So you do have to be careful of how you are communicating things. And understand that sometimes there will be bridges that potentially could impact you in the future. So you just have to be aware of that, right? Like this could be a hiring manager of mine in the future. They could be this in the future. So I think the way that you communicate is key.
If you're an aspiring leader of people within within any industry that you work in, regardless, that pool of people ends up becoming very, very small, very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And people do start to know each other, even in a country as big as the United States. Like the networks and this become very, very small. And being conscious that decisions you make now could impact you in 10 years' time. I think obviously trying to deal with integrity and transparency, of course, and you do have to look after number one at the end of the day, especially in a market that's been remorseless the other way around. And hopefully they'll understand that. But you have to take as with all advice, right? You have to understand your personal circumstances and take a risk based on the information that you have in front of you. I'm conscious that we've got into loads of topics here, and it's been super interesting. I've kind of two final questions for you. One is, you mentioned earlier about evaluating content creators and practitioners. Kind of a direct question. Like, do you worry as you get further and further away from being a recruiter that you will lose something in your content?
Well, I do still do recruitment. So there are, I will take on searches. And I've done that for that very reason. I'm trying tools and I'm doing stuff. So, but I do think that's a real thing for sure, and I've seen it with like recruitment trainers where it's like they come in and it's like, yeah, you haven't recruited in like 5 years. So do you really know like
Yeah.
what's up? And I even found out with my managers, right? Where it's like, okay, you haven't recruited in 5 years. Why are you telling me how to do my job? So yeah, I take on, like I've got a couple of contract searches which are actually starting in the next week or so. And typically most of the work
Nice.
that I do is like splits with other people. So like they'll come to me or I will take leads in and split that work with people to maybe, someone's doing the sourcing and I'm just doing like the full out screen.
Yeah.
So yeah, for that reason, keep my hand
Nice.
in it.
No, and I think that is a really important point when it comes to content creation, especially in the recruiting world. Like this world is changing really, really fast, and there's very few people in the world who are able to keep their hand on the pulse whilst also being a tier one content creator. And I think we probably all know who those people are, but there's a lot of people who create content that have been out of it for a long time. And I think it's partly when James and I started this, we had, and ironically he's not here now, but like we wanted to be practitioners who also spoke about what they did. And that was a really core part of how we were building the vision of this podcast. And my intention is to go back to work and still do this. And for James, that hasn't necessarily worked out, but it was core to everything that we were trying to build because we wanted to give people the insight of like, this is what's happening in the market right now because we are in it and we know like which applicant tracking systems are and aren't using different types of tooling and like we know to speak to X, Y, and Z. Like that was important to us. Cool. So absolutely awesome to have you today, Joel. That has been such a fantastic discussion. We covered so much there and hopefully lots, if you're an aspiring content creator and kind of thinking about how you want to approach LinkedIn, or you're thinking about your career pivot, or you're thinking about your like how to navigate this job market and like how to evaluate content creators online as well. Like so much that we got into there. So I really appreciate having you on for a kind of special 20th episode with the realist recruiter, Joel Lalgee. Thanks so much.
Yeah, let's go.
And so let's finish this podcast in the way that we finish every podcast, which is with an interview question that was left to you by the previous guest. And so this one you are going to love, and is if I could have picked anyone in the world for me to ask this question to, you would have been the person that was
Perfect.
good. So it's absolutely beautiful. Tell me about a time where someone changed your mind online.
Yeah, this is a great question. I'd say there haven't been many. I'll preface it, but I did have one time where I actually made a post, and I got the post. And this is a content creation hack for anyone who's out there. Reposting and like taking content that's already out there and making it your own can be a good strategy for getting content out. In this case, I'd seen a post that had gone viral. It was actually on TikTok, and it was, kind of a hustle post, I would say. And the post was something like, I went from watching Netflix to doing this XYZ, and it was basically a comparison thing of like, I went from wasting time to doing something productive. Mm-hmm. And I actually got called out by several of my connections, and they were like, this is just hustle culture. And so I ended up taking the post down and then making an apology post. But I think like where my mind was changed was when I actually read the post. I didn't think it was like that. I just thought, oh yeah, this is just a list of like things that could be a waste of time. But then, and I actually had a conversation because it was weird because I had like people reaching out to me who were like, no, that post was amazing. You shouldn't have taken it down. But then several people who I was actually respect and I'm close with, I had conversations with them, and they were just like, you look like there's a lot of people who are burned out, and the way that post was, it wasn't acknowledging the fact that like there's nothing wrong with like relaxing and doing these things. So that's probably the one that sticks out to me the most.
I love that. I think that is in many respects like a power to the power of content creation and having a network and stuff like that. Like you went on like a personal journey as a result of posting something online that you hadn't thought about deeply, that you were prompted to think about deeply because of people's reactions, that's impacted your perspective on this thing. Okay. That was awesome. And so what is your question that you want to leave to the next guest?
Yeah, I would say if there is one thing that you would just change in your career, so thinking about now from when you started, what would that be and why?
Nice. I like that. Awesome. Well, Joel, thank you again so much. What an excellent way to round out the 20th episode. And thank you so much for coming on. And for everyone out there who's not already following you and is not already engaging with your content, where can we find you?
Yep. If you go to www.therealistrecruiter.com, you can find me right there. It's got all the links to all my socials along with my podcast, which is called Recruiting is No Joke. So, yep, www.therealistrecruiter.com.
Awesome. And as ever, you can write in with your questions either for our guests or for me directly, opentoworkpod@gmail.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn. You can follow me, Matthew Parker, on LinkedIn, and also my website, matthewparkeradvisory.com. There's so much more coming from the Open to Work podcasting community. Really stay tuned. We've got some mega announcements coming in the coming weeks. So thanks so much for supporting and hopefully, please like and share this podcast, right? Like, we're here to help and we're here to support people in navigating this job market. And so every single time that you like and share and engage with the content, it means we know you're listening, but also it means that we're helping you and helping people all around the world. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Matthew.